Thanks everyone for all the speakers today, Barkley for hosting us. We're really excited to dive into the topics of retail media, and hopefully all of you can walk away with some key learnings and learn something from this session you can take and apply to your life or your clients' businesses. So to start out, let's dive right in. The adoption of retail media has seen a significant surge in the last 5 years. Lauren, can you walk us through some of the factors that you would contribute towards this rapid growth?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like with anything, there are of course a ton of different factors at play, but I think something that has really accelerated that growth is just how many different players stand to benefit and are therefore highly motivated to invest their time, their resources, their tech into this space, from retailers and non-endemic brands, but even extending into, or retailers and endemic brands, but even extending into non-endemic brands. And at a time when each of these players is experiencing not insignificant headwinds in their industries. So take retailers, for example. They are facing increasingly squeezed profit margins thanks to the increase in just the really growing demands of e-commerce, increase in shipping rates, in returns, and infrastructure. And so for them, retail media is an opportunity to grow not only their top-line revenue by driving incremental store visits, incremental sales, but also to grow their bottom-line profits by monetizing the wealth of customer data that they're already sitting on. So for them, huge win-win on two very important fronts. Then moving into brands, for endemic brands, retail media is a way for them to make smarter investments by having actual sales data that they can attribute to their media campaigns. And that's pretty much the holy grail, full stop. But even really all brands, so endemics, non, can stand to benefit by being able to tap into audiences that have the precision of first-party data, but the scale that is much more akin to third-party data. And that's a gap that advertisers have been trying to bridge for ages. Add to that the backdrop of cookie deprecation, which all brands are scrambling to future-proof their targeting strategies, their attribution strategies. And I think it's really no wonder that retail media is such an attractive offering, because it has the potential to mitigate many of the challenges that these players are facing today.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I think as the retailers have continued to adapt and more offerings are coming, and then what we've seen with cookie deprecation, it's really shot it up to ensure that it's top of everyone's list the last few years and this year. How do you communicate like the true value proposition of retail data to the different brands and partners that you're working with?
Yeah, and I think this is important to split that out, because it's going to be different for endemic brands and non-endemic brands. So for endemic brands, or those that are sold in the retailer's stores, for them, I'm emphasizing the ability to make purchases, so buy their campaigns, spend their dollars more judiciously, with more confidence and less waste than ever before. Because rather than relying on vanity metrics like CTR, video completion rates, attribution modeling like media mix modeling or even brand lift studies, they're able to attribute actual sales to verified campaign exposure. And to me, that's really the difference between thinking that your dollars are at work for you and being able to prove it. So one story that I really like to tell is a brand that we were working with, endemic to Target. And historically, this brand had optimized their campaigns based on CTR, their digital campaigns. Of course, with access to Target's data, we were able to leverage their sales data, able to optimize toward ROAS. And so get the campaign off the ground week over week. We're seeing really steady improvements in ROAS. Clients very happy with the performance, but they're asking, what about that CTR? Why is that not improving? And admittedly, the CTR was pretty uninspiring, pretty stagnant. But we just continued to have that conversation that we are optimizing toward ROAS. So that's what we kept our sights on. So hit midway through the campaign, and our ROAS is about 3x. By the end of the campaign, we have a ROAS of 5x. That type of performance pretty much put any conversations about CTR to bed. But had we tinkered around with different optimizations to improve CTR, I have no doubt that we would have spent our dollars differently and much less effectively and achieved nowhere near the performance that we ended up seeing.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point with this massive opportunity with retail data. You said it earlier, for endemic brands, people that sell their products within these stores. This is the holy grail, full stop, on being able to drive and optimize towards sales, which impacts an advertiser's bottom line. But we can get caught in some of these other metrics we've had to rely on historically to be directional. But with that power and the capabilities of partners like the Trade Desk and other retail networks, being able to drive those sales, measure it. How do you take this into consideration for non-endemic brands?
Yeah, so for non-endemics, or those that are not sold in the retailer stores, we of course do not have that sales data to rely on. So for them, I'm emphasizing the power of the audience data itself. And I think of it this way. Many third-party data vendors are building audiences based on online browsing behavior. Retail media networks generally are building their audiences based on actual sales, actual purchase data, and really high intent purchase signals. And I'll tell you why that's important, just using myself as an example. Were you to build an audience of me based on my online browsing behavior, you might peg me as some kind of master chef. I love reading all kinds of food blogs, following all kinds of food content creators, baking, cooking, saving recipes, the whole 9 yards. But when it comes to what I cook and what I eat, I could not be more boring. It's the same handful of things, day over day, very little variation. And so you'd be much better off, and the audience would be, or a segment would be much more accurate were you to look at a profile built from Walmart, where I buy my groceries, than any online browsing behavior. I think those two profiles, were you to look at them together, would be laughably different. And so I think that really gets to the point of nothing's really going to be able to predict future purchase behavior quite like past purchase behavior, which is what retail media networks are able to package so well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Getting down to the deterministic data that that each retailer provides and the indications that you can tie back to who you're trying to reach from the target audience of whatever brands you're working with. On the contrary, what are the biggest blockers or challenges that you've seen when communicating, why and how to adopt retail media for brands? Yes,
and I am under no illusion. I do not think that retail media is here to save all of advertising, so just want to be clear on that point. It does have plenty of its own challenges, and some that we've certainly run into. I think that two of them that I think are most prominent are the complexity and the lack of standardization. And what I mean by that is each retail media network is its own walled garden. It has its own processes and platforms and tech and ad specs and ad formats and measurement methodologies and engagement metrics, and I could keep going. On top of that, there's a new retail media network popping up, it just seems like every month, every other week. And so many of these retail media networks are at different stages in their maturity. And so what that means for anybody on the outside trying to get in is that it is a wildly complex space and can be very daunting to break into. But even for people that are in it, even having some campaigns under your belt, it can be difficult because what works with one retailer may not be transferable to another. And so there can be a lot of hurdles even once you are in the space. Good news is I'm not the only one to run into these challenges, and there are a lot of players that are working toward addressing some of these challenges. Albertsons, for one, has partnered with the IAB to put forth framework that recommends standardization among retail media networks in things like their ad specs, like the measurement methodologies. And so while it is certainly growing and is not without its growing pains, I am confident that the right people, the right organizations are asking the right questions and solving for the right problems and really moving us forward more rapidly than were we in a space that, like we said at the top, weren't growing so rapidly and having as much incentive for investment.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's this massive opportunity, and there's a lot of new and innovative partners coming to the space, but that comes with nuance, right? And you need to weigh that in terms of what is best for your brand at this time, or the brands that you're working with. And like, how would you approach looking at the different retailers for a given brand? How do you put together kind of a multi-retailer approach, or like how would you go about that?
Yeah, I think this is another place where it can be helpful to differentiate who it is that I'm working with, whether that's an endemic brand or a non-endemic brand. Because for endemic brands, it's admittedly a little easier. You can look at where they're sold, and that really narrows things down. From there, though, I am making sure that I am hyper-focused on what their campaign goals are. So, for example, if I have a brand whose goal is to increase sales at a specific retailer, that decision pretty much makes itself. But if I have a brand, say, that's interested in increasing their market share across a category, I'm going to look at where they're sold and then look at which retailers offer competitive conquesting and continue evaluating from there. Or say they want to run a full funnel campaign to both drive awareness and sales. Then I'm going to be looking at which retailers offer both on-site executions and off-site executions. And for those off-site executions, I'm also asking, what channels can I apply those to? Can I apply that retail media network's data to upper funnel tactics like CTV, like audio? I think similar principles apply when I'm evaluating retailers for non-endemics, but something for non-endemics that I am hyper aware of and honestly very critical of is how granular their taxonomies are. Because I will be honest, if I see that a retailer's taxonomy is not robust enough, if their custom audiences are not tailored enough, there's a good chance that I'm going to encourage that brand to look elsewhere, be that a different retailer, or to look outside of retail media altogether. Because like we know, one, it's expensive, and two, retail media networks are at varying stages in their maturity in this space. And so I've even come across some networks that are frankly have a taxonomy that is too broad to warrant the premium for a non-endemic brand.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the premium cost of this data, and I think it's so important for endemics or non-endemics to make sure that you're asking for that transparency, what's going into the data to ensure you're getting that value that retail data should provide, and being able to evaluate the different retailers, ensure all those capabilities, and really get down to how to best use that data for the specific use cases that you're looking at. I'd like to dive deeper a little bit into that. For the, retail data comes at a premium cost, but how do you weigh the cost benefit for the advertisers that you're bringing this to?
Yes. $1 million question. And so I think a lot of the same principles that we just went over, I certainly think those apply, but Something else that I would add on to that is that retail media doesn't have to be an all or nothing. It can run very effectively alongside existing strategies. So we kind of go back to what we talked about earlier about it being the bridge between first party, those precision segments, and third party data, more scale. And by running that way, not only can you offset some of the costs, include those third-party segments or less expensive strategies that then can, again, offset and balance some of the costs. But then you can also only invest more into the retail segments once they're proving that they are worth the premium.
Yeah, I think that's, again, a great point. So I guess for the marketers, brands, and partners in the room today, what do you wish you would have known as you began this retail media journey and building and executing campaigns?
Yeah, start early. Start probably earlier than you want to or think you need to. Sometimes on the order of months. Not all retail media networks will require that, but even when they do provide you their turnaround times, I would pad those a little bit as well, especially when it comes to working with any custom segments. So that's one. Two, ask a lot of questions. I think you'll be surprised by what you find out. For example, something I found out just by doing exactly that is that not all, or some retailers will supplement their first-party data with third-party data. Not a problem, has its place, I understand. However, that's something I want to know when I'm evaluating one retail media network against another, especially if I'm working with a non-endemic brand and I'm trying to justify the premium that I'm paying for those segments. So I'd say that's two. Three, I think everyone can benefit from having a direct relationship with the retailers, even if you're accessing them through a third party. And I think it just gives a more holistic view of their offering. So for example, a lot of the work that we do with Walmart is through the trade desk. But the trade desk doesn't have a social media play. And so in order to explore social media with Walmart, it of course really helped that we had a direct connection to their team.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that each retailer, and then the brands with those retailers, especially for endemics, they can have relationships that expand far beyond even just media, let alone social versus digital or omni-channel, offsite, onsite. So I think being able to break that down and ensure that everyone's on the same page going into this, that you get everyone in the room to align and make sure that those timelines match up, because we talked about with different retailers, there's going to be different nuances, and those can come with approvals, timelines. So ensuring that, along with any sort of custom data, first-party data, all of that is lined up so that when you are looking at a launch date, it doesn't sneak up on you and everything's approved. So with the last few minutes here, I guess, where would you recommend people to start and the first steps to take?
Yeah, and a lot of this I think we've covered in bits, but to bring it all home, first and foremost, I think it's so important to make sure that you're honest with yourself about what the campaign's goals are. There are, like we've discussed, sometimes when retail media is not going to be the right tool for the job, and that is okay. Being honest about the goals you have for the campaign, first and foremost, important part. Two, once you do decide that retail media is the right play, then it's on to evaluating the retailers. And at this point, I love to point anyone newer to the space to a report that's put out by the Mars agency. It's called the Retail Media Report Card. It comes out quarterly, and it does a beautiful job of laying out all the major players in the space, what their capabilities are, the nuances, and it stacks all of those retail media networks up against the others. It also includes entry points, so you can see what third parties those retailers may work with, how you might be able to get access to them outside of working with them directly. And I think what this report does too is it does a lot of the legwork for you. You don't have to put a ton of work into tracking down and talking with every single retailer to get an idea of if they're the right fit for your campaign goals. From there, once you have narrowed it down and have a decent idea of which retailer is going to be right for you, then it's time to pick up the phone, either calling retailers directly or finding great partners in the space that can help you make the right connections and can help you navigate the space. I think that it's a great opportunity to just talk about what a phenomenal partner the Trade Desk has been for us in this respect. Their team has been an incredible resource and wealth of knowledge as we've navigated this space, and you could do a lot worse by calling on their team. So once you have, though, figured out, started those relationships, kicked off those communications, it goes back to asking a lot of questions. I would recommend putting together, and something that we've found very helpful for our company, is putting together just a giant matrix of all of the different retailers and partners that we work with, what their capabilities are, all of the different nuances that apply to their networks. And that's been a really great tool for our sales team to be able to go to market with what is otherwise, again, a very complex space, to really be able to wrap their arms around it. And so, all right, you've gone through all of those steps. You've really zeroed in on a few retailers or relationships that you think can move your campaigns forward. At that point, I would recommend, when you're ready to launch, start with one retailer. Start with one, get your feet wet, evaluate the effectiveness of that campaign toward your goal, and then expand your relationships from there. Like we said, lots of nuance, a lot of differences among the different retailers. So it can be helpful to not bite off more than you can chew, and really take baby steps to get started as you wade into what I still think is a very exciting space.
Awesome. Thank you so much for walking us through all that. Super helpful, and I think you and your teams have done a great job of building out that matrix and taking the action. So thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you, and thank you, everybody. Great to be here.